I'm just waiting for the
mute on.
Right, so good afternoon, everybody. We'll be presenting today on vRealize Automation, Getting It Right. Our panelists today are Sajal Devnath and Prasanna Shetty. And thank you, everyone, for joining in for this session. We'll be getting started. I'll just pass on the ball to Sajal for presentation. Just some basic rules. If you have any questions, you can put those questions in the Q&A window or the chat window. And Prasanna, either of the presenters would actually respond to your questions. They will also try to address those questions verbally. If they have been addressed, they will mention that in the session. Otherwise, if there's any question which is left out and we're not able to answer on this session, we'll get back to you by email. Great. So we will also have a Q&A session at the end, towards the end of the module, or once we completed with the webinar. We'll have another 15 minutes for the Q&A exclusively. So if there's a question which has been answered already and you want some more clarity, maybe you would want to wait till the end for the Q&A session. So with that, I will just pass on the ball to Sajal. Sajal, go ahead, please.
Hi, thank you, Raminder. Hello, everyone. My name is Sajal Devnath. I'm a solution architect with the CMDO team, along with my colleague, Prasanna Shetty. Today, I'm going to talk about vRealize Automation, the entire product life cycle, what goes at the back end, and what are the different components of the product, and I will finish it off with a small demo. So the agenda for today is first, the importance of VRA, why we need VRA, the architecture of VRA, different components in the VRA virtual appliance, IaaS components, how we put it all together, and the after part where you actually go ahead and configure the different components to get the end catalog. So most of us, or I would say all of us, know about SDDC, Software Defined Data Center. Cloud management is very much fundamental to the SDDC scenario, the entire story altogether. Right? So we want to deploy applications, any applications to any device from hosted in any cloud environment. That's what the end goal of Software Defined Data Center is. And cloud management is obviously a major part. VRA is at the core of that SDDC story, or SDDC vision, I would say, which defines, delivers, and governs the software defined data center. And that's why VRA is the most important aspect or most important part of the entire SDDC journey or the vision. Right? So vRealize Automation, the architecture part, there are typically three different components. But before I go ahead, I'm assuming that all of you or most of you are pretty much well versed with vRealize Automation, different as a whole different product itself or the different architecture itself. But I'm going to go deep into the different components and architecture. So as a whole, we have three major components of VRA. When you say vRealize Automation, it comprises of three things. First thing is vRealize Automation Virtual Appliance, Java-based appliance. The second thing is vRealize Automation IaaS services, or infrastructure as a service services, which are based on .NET. And again, vRealize Automation Orchestrator appliance, which may be internal or external. It's again a Java-based appliance. So typically, these three components are the major components of VRA solution. Now, if we go ahead and break down the different components, we see the Cafe appliance or vRealize Automation Virtual Appliance, which is called Cafe appliance. It has certain components like Identity Manager, Application Services, Event Broker Service, vRealize Orchestrator Service, and then Component Registry is there, which is the, I would say, mother of all the services. It manages all the different services that they are in Cafe. So it talks to Identity Manager and the other services. For IaaS services, we have Manager Service, Model Manager with Proxy Agents, DEM Orchestrator, DEM Worker. So I will go ahead and talk about the details of each and every component. So as you can see, that we have few external components as well, like login site and vRealize operations, which you can integrate with VRE, and then vRealize business is also there. And you would need SQL database as an external database for IaaS services. whereas VRE or Cafe appliance has PostgreSQL as the internal database. And from external perspective, the communication perspective, as an end user, you can either communicate with VRE through the portal that it provides or directly through REST APIs. Any client that you can use which understands the REST APIs, you can interact to the portal, the entire solution through REST APIs as well. Now, virtual machine requirement. How many virtual machines do you need to build that vRealize automation, the entire solution? So typically, Cafe is your one single VM. MS SQL Server, you should have a separate SQL Server data virtual machines. For IaaS component services, you need to have a manager service, proxy agents, model manager web, and orchestrator club together, and then demo workers VMs. And then if you're utilizing vRealize orchestrator, external orchestrator, you would need a virtual machines for that also. These are typical virtual machine requirements. It's not mandatory. You can put all the IaaS services together, clubbed together in a single virtual machine as well. But it's suggested, depending on your environment, you can do a distributed deployment. So we will cover that distributed deployment, what the different components that.
I guess we lost audio with Sajal. Sajal, if he's rejoining, give me a couple of minutes. So guys, bear with us. Sajal is rejoining.
Hey, Ravinder, we have joined back. Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, Sajal, we can. Yes, Sajal, we can hear you.
Till which point were you able to hear me? Because we didn't notice that we got just dropped. Should I start from here or just one slide back?
Yeah, just start from a slide back. Go back and start from there.
From here? It seems that WebEx is too slow. I have already, okay. Start from here? Okay. So probably I will start from this slide. VRA component overview. So as I was saying,
further you can go to slide 8.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
From here.
Can the audience please confirm if you are able to hear Sajal properly now? One of you can confirm that. Suresh, you there? If you can confirm.
Yeah, I'm there. So we are able to hear him properly. He can start from slide 8. I was talking, but in fact slide 8 is where we got disconnected.
Great, thanks.
So as I was saying that you would need these many VMs, not mandatorily these many VMs, because you would need, you can do a consolidated implementation of all the IaaS service in a single machine. In that case, the minimum deployment would be cafe host, a single virtual machine, it's an appliance. A SQL server, it should be external. But if it's a very small environment or POC environment, you can even install SQL Server inside the IaaS services machine. So a single Windows machine, put all the services there, and VRO as internal VRO. So in that case, you would need 2 machines. That's the minimum requirement. And then you can do obviously distributed deployment, which will require somewhere around 14. And then if you are talking about external machines, at least 3 machines. One for login site, one for VROps, vRealize Operations Manager, and vRealize Business. Right? This is the minimum requirement you will have. So we will, I will go ahead and talk about individual components like VRA Virtual Appliance and then IaaS services. So first we will start off with vRealize Appliance. Inside that appliance, typically you have these services. The first one is vPostgres database. And second one is RabbitMQ. What it does, we will talk about in a bit. Then Elasticsearch, Horizon for your identity manager, VCAT server, that's the main server, VRO server, VRO configurator, the one you use for configuring the VRO server. Then Shell UI is the basic UI or the web pages that is served from Cafe Appliance. And then you have component registry. As I was saying, component registry is the main server or the main service which manages all the other services. So every other service are registered with component registry. Like the other services like identity, event log, catalog, approval, these are all services. Licensing for the matter, these are all services. So they get registered with component registry and they interact with each other through component registry. Right? So the major change from VRA 6.2 to 7.2 is the identity manager. In 6.2 we had an external identity manager. In 7.2 we have a 7.x for the matter. We have an internal identity manager. The identity manager resides inside this Cafe appliance. So it uses the PostgreSQL, and you can have either embedded identity provider, which is local to that identity manager, or you can integrate with third-party identity provider services like Active Directory through connected services. Right? So in a typical high availability configuration, if you have multiple vRealize appliance VMs or Cafe appliances, then a connector needs to be set up for both VRA nodes for redundancy. So that it would be if any of the VMs goes down, the other will take care of the authentication portion. Event broker service is another major change in VRA 7.x. So now what we have, it actually runs RabbitMQ, which is the event broker manager at the back end. So the RabbitMQ that we have just seen here in this slide, like number 2 is RabbitMQ. It actually helps to run the event broker services. So it operates under announcement-based semantics. Like something happens, you have 3 components: producer, event broker, and consumer. Producer obviously produces the events, where each event type should be registered with the event broker. Event broker is the one which enables providers to register and manage the different type of events that happens in the environment, and publishes the events, and consumer consumes the events. Now, to make it more simpler terms, I would say I have deployed a virtual machine and I want that something to happen once the virtual machine is powered on. or say if the virtual machine is powered down, then something should happen. It should trigger some other actions. So I can take help of event broker services to actually make those workflows so that once the VM is powered off, probably it would go, or say powered on, it would go ahead and update some database configuration. I can build all these through event broker services. Then there is IaaS service, anything as a service. Right? So typically, what we used to call it is Advanced Service Designer in 6.2. In 7.x, we say IaaS service. So at the back end, it's still called ASD in component registry. Remember, component registry registers all the different services. So the services by which it is known at the component registry level is Advanced Service Designer or ASD. So it can interact with VRO through VRO gateway, or say provisioning, authoring done through IaaS resources, work item catalogs, and forms. The forms custom forms that is built in VRA is all part of this IaaS service. And lastly, application services, which is new in 7.x, is typically we had application director or app director. That particular product is integrated with VRA now and is called as application services. It runs the software service component. It leverages in-gate configuration model. So you need, if you want to do some application level provisioning or software level provisioning, you need to have in-gate agent for those these endpoints. And it is bootstrapped as the part of provisioning and communicates with the VRA appliance back for different tasks. It keeps the communication between the between the servers and the endpoints. Now I'm going to talk about IaaS components. So to sum it up, before I go ahead and talk about IaaS components, VRA appliance is the cafe appliance which has your component registry and different other services. The major of them is VIDM, Identity Manager, which does all the authentication and handles that authentication portion. You can either use the internal authentication mechanism, or you can integrate with third-party external authentication or service say authentication providers like Active Directory or LDAP servers. And then you have event broker services, SaaS services, and application services. These are all part of this. Next comes the IaaS component. So IaaS component typically has your IaaS web server, and then manager, this game worker, is your agent or the agent services, and then VRA appliance. If it's external, then VRA appliance or VRA appliance. These all are part of the infrastructure as a service component. So, like, as I said, the web manager worker, proxy agent, and SQL server. These are the components which would need to build the IaaS infrastructure or IaaS portion, right? So, manager service, it manages the life cycle of an IaaS machine from end to end, from start to end. You raise a request for a machine, and the time it gets deleted or destroyed, till that time, whatever happens with the particular IaaS component or the virtual machine is handled by manager service. It communicates with the proxy agent and the guest agent, but one point to note that whenever it processes a work item, the response only comes from the proxy agent. The end guest agent never gives back a response, right? And it invokes external workflows or on-state transitions. So external workflow in the sense, if you build any workflow in VCO or VRO, vRealize orchestrator, it would invoke that as well. And it receives the provisioning requests from DEM workers, distributor execution manager. So we have under IaaS, I have web component, I have manager service, I have model manager, I have distributed execution orchestrator, workers, and proxy agent. So manager service handles the end-to-end life cycle of a particular IaaS component. The workflow that it runs at the back end, say it's a stateful workflow, so it knows that which state it is in. So if something goes wrong, say one machine goes down, it still holds the state. it's disposing, unprovisioning machine, on, off, building machine, waiting to build. These are all the states that you can have for the master workflow under manager service. The proxy agents, typically you interact with the end resources or the endpoints, the way we call it. Like say, for example, one vCenter server is an vSphere agent. It interacts with VRA through vSphere agent. So these are called proxy agents, which executes the task for the work items. So say typically it builds a hypervisor specific configuration specs. So the moment you say I need a virtual machine, you request it in the catalog. Proxy agent builds the configuration that is understandable by the hypervisor. Say for example, if it is talking to a vCenter server, it builds the configuration specific to vCenter server. If it's talking to a say Hyper-V environment or Red Hat Zen environment, so it will build accordingly and then execute the task on the hypervisor, obviously through SDK or the APIs. And then once it's done, it actually sends back the response. Whether it was succeeded or it was a failure, it sends back that information. It pings the hypervisor and sends the ping response to a manager service as well. So if an endpoint is not reachable, it is the task of the proxy agent to make sure that whether it's alive or not, it sends that information back to the manager service. There is no typical effective way to stop a running agent without impacting the active work. So that means, say I have currently deployed the request for 10 virtual machines, and those workflows are actually running through proxy agents. Proxy agent does not make us maintains a list of whatever things that it is doing. So if that particular moment proxy agent goes down, the task is lost. That's why if the agent goes down, it would impact your active work items. That's the importance of proxy agent. And it requires direct communication with manager service. So the thing is, if you are doing a distributed deployment, if you have a separate virtual machine in proxy agent and another machine for manager service, then it needs direct communication path between these machines. And it obviously needs to trust the certificate of on the manager service. The deployment, typically, it's a one-to-one relationship. One single proxy agent can talk to one single endpoint. It cannot talk to multiple endpoints. But the other is true. Multiple proxy agents can point to a single source. And you should have that from the sense, as you can see in this architecture, that vCenter Server 0 has two different proxy agents pointing to the same vCenter server. So if any one of the proxy agents goes down, the other takes care of the communication and running the workflows and stuff. You should have this kind of environment. But remember that a single proxy agent is the one-to-one relationship for the proxy agent, but one-to-many relationship from the endpoint to the proxy agent's server. Next, the model manager. So we had manager service, we had proxy agent. Next one is model manager, web or repository. It's a typical IaaS-based service which exposes the IaaS data model as a service. So when you deploy a VRA appliance, cafe appliance, you get certain web pages. And when you deploy IaaS components, you get another set of web pages. So few of the pages are taken from cafe appliance, few of the pages are taken from IaaS, this IaaS machine host or the model manager web host through the IaaS service. This is what it gives you. It gives you the filtering option. Like for example, group of machines, or it handles events, machine allocation, plugins, like for example dynamic name generation, name verification. These kind of plugins are handled by this, and obviously authorization and security is also something which is handled by model manager. Then the next or last two components are DEM orchestrator and DEM agent. So I would say workers, DEM workers. So DEM orchestrator, obviously, it's the inbuilt orchestrator that is there inside the IaaS component. It's not the VRO orchestrator. So remember, we need a VRO, vRealize orchestrator, when you need something externally. But internally, vRealize automation has an orchestrator which runs everything. This is the DEM orchestrator. It pre-processes the workflows. It makes sure that only one instance of the run, one only workflow is there. And when scheduling, no scheduling is overlapping. That is a task of DEM. And making sure of that is the task of DEM orchestrator. Apart from that, it makes sure that there are DEMs running that can run all the required workflows. So see, whatever workflow that is initiated from the back end, there are enough DEM workers which can run this particular workflow. And if any DEM worker stops working, then it manages the workflows for that particular DEM worker. Last component is DEM worker, which is an executioner or executor for Microsoft .NET workflow workflows, WF workflows. They are all equivalent in role and function. So all the DEM workers are equal. It's like they have the same function and same role, unless you specifically mention certain skills for them. So workflows that are executed by the DEMs include communication with some provisioning endpoints, like for example Amazon EC2 or vCloud Air or KVM and that kind of thing. Skills are that simple tags that you can assign to a particular workflow, DEM worker. So if you build a catalog item or a custom catalog item where you say that it will do certain, it will be specific to certain skills, then you need to have one DEM worker which is tagged with that skill that it will run there. Otherwise, that workflow will never run. It will get stuck there. It will throw an error later on, but it will get stuck at that environment. And the skills tag, that is not dynamic. That is manually and fixed. Typical worker deployments, you will need you will deploy multiple workers for the high availability purpose, and it's not one-to-one relationship, it's one-to-many relationship. So a single DEM worker can talk to multiple endpoints, right? And there's a limit. Typically, a single DEM worker would put 100 workflows running, concurrent workflows running on that. So you would increase your number of DEM workers depending on the workload that is running on the VRA environment. So you would need more scale accordingly. Right? There's a difference between, now the thing is, what's the difference between proxy agent and the DEM worker? So type of work that these two do are a bit different. So proxy agent typically does mostly, I would say, more basic operations like power on, shutdown, reboot, power cycle, or install VMware tools, reprovision, suspend. Whereas the actions done by DEM worker are typically reconfigure the machines, creating a snapshot, deleting a snapshot, or reverting snapshots. These are the tasks that are done by DEM worker. And one point to note here that proxy agents always gives back a response, work response back to the main manager that this was the result of that particular workflow of the run. But DEM workers never gives you a response back. That's the another major difference in these two. So far so good. I think that, am I not fast enough, or am being fast enough? More faster? Do I need to slow down or anything? Or is it going good? Okay. So if we try to put it all together, this is the way we would deploy. Sizing and scale is typically by the number of virtual machines an environment can handle. So in VRA terms, or vRealize automation terms, we'll call, say, 10,000 virtual machines is a small environment because it can handle 10,000 virtual machines. A small single appliance deployment can handle everything. So in that small deployment, we can have a single VRA appliance, a single IaaS module, a single virtual machine with all the components in it. And then I say on the separate SQL database, it can handle till 10,000 virtual machines. A medium distributed deployment, typically you would again go ahead with a single vRealize appliance, say IaaS module on a single the manager service and the model manager in the single host, and then DEM plus proxy agents in another host, so another virtual machines. So you will split up the IaaS environment into 2 virtual machines. It's a typical distributed deployment for the medium environment. And if I'm talking about medium with high availability, distributed high availability, in that case, I'm making each and every component high available. So I would need 2 different vRealize appliances. I will deploy 2 IaaS module, SQL cluster, and DEM worker plus DEM agents, different multiple DEM worker plus agents, typically 2 worker and agent. But note that here also we are talking about IaaS modules. The modules like web component and the model manager, both of them are together, clubbed together. And in a large environment, which typically can handle up to 50,000 virtual machines, we do a distributed of each of every component. So here again, we have 2 virtual vRealize appliance. Then in IaaS component, we distribute the manager service and the model manager. So IaaS web, the model manager, the repository, there are 2 machines for that. For manager service, there are 2 machines. And then DEM worker plus agent, there are 2 machines for that. So in a single machine, I will put a DEM worker plus proxy agent, another machine again DEM worker plus proxy agent. That will be my fully distributed with high availability for each and every component. But when I say high availability, how the components work, like are all of them active, or few of them are active, passive, or are they automated? So not all the components are active when I say high availability. So for example, inside Cafe appliance or vRealize automation virtual appliance, we have VCAT server service and component registry, identity manager, event broker, and then vPostgreSQL. So vPostgreSQL is always an active passive, and you need a manual failover. If something happens to one node, you need to manually failover the database. Just make note of that. And under IaaS services, you have manager server service, which is again active passive and needs a manual failover. Model manager data, which is typically if it's inactive, then fine. Model manager web or repository, it's the main, it's active. Proxy agent is active. DEM orchestrator is active passive, but it does an automatic failover. So if there are multiple DEM work orchestrators, say 2 or 3, so if one goes down, the other will do automatic failover. But at any point of time, only single DEM orchestrator is active, right? And worker are always active. So you have model manager, model manager web, which is your IaaS components. That is active. Proxy agent is active. DEM worker is active. DEM orchestrator will do an active passive failover, but manager server service, that is manual failover. So that is a typical high availability environment. So if I do a distributed high availability deployment, this is typically how it would look. User can come and hit a load balancer. And behind the load balancer, you will have multiple vRealize appliance nodes, right? And then behind that, you will have again a load balancer for the IaaS component, and load balancer for IaaS manager server. Then vRealize appliance, if you are using an external appliance, for 7.2 onwards, it is suggested that you use internal vRealize appliance. You don't use external vRealize appliance. You have a typical SQL cluster for your environment, and then multiple DEM workers and vSphere agents. That's how your typical distributed high availability environment should look like. Right? And all the communication that happens between the components are on port 443. So that is secured. The database, since it's SQL database, 1433 is the port number that you would require. except that everything is on port 443. So till this point, we have talked about different components of vRealize environment. vRealize cafe environment, IaaS environment, to have how the deployment architecture should be, which goes into active mode, which goes into active-passive mode. That's fine. You have deployed that entire environment. Next what? Now what to do? Because deploying the component does not entitle an up and running cloud environment. You still need to do a lot of configurations internally. So there are certain things, there are a lot of roles and responsibilities in the VRA environment once that everything is deployed. So typically you have infrastructure architect, app architect, software architect, and then application architect and catalog administrator. Say infrastructure architect typically creates, publishes machine blueprints and networking and security components. App architect builds and publish SaaS component. Software architect will build the software component, and the application architect will assemble components from a different software component that is published by software architect or SaaS components or other blueprints and tie it all together. That application architect will do that, and catalog administrator will actually consume all those catalog items which is published from the blueprint area and build a catalog item and then enter and all that other portion. Catalog administrator will do the entitlement portion. So in vRealize automation cloud environment, typically we talk about tenants. The moment you deploy a VRA environment, by default, there's a default tenant that has been created for you. You log in there as a system admin. Right? So system and infrastructure configuration that you do from there. So default tenant, the moment you configure, like say for example vSphere.local environment, and you log in with administrator at vSphere.local, you can create a tenant there. You do the system-wide branding, like the branding that you set there, it's applicable for all the tenants, and notification providers, inbound and outbound email servers you will configure, and then event logs you will be able to see. That is the default tenant. So the default tenant can also have the infrastructure fabric configured there, and you can define multiple fabrics. So when you configure the tenants and then you log into vSphere.local as a tenant admin, the first thing that you would do as the typical workflow is you would add endpoints. The physical endpoints, not the physical servers, Windows does not support the physical servers anymore, but public clouds or the other hypervisors, you add those endpoints, you get the resources, and then the next task is define the fabric groups. Fabric groups are the actual resources, right? Like in vCloud Directory environment, we had provided releases, which actually provided the resources. Here we have fabric groups, and then you define the fabric admin who can manage that particular fabric group, and then you log in as a fabric admin, and fabric admin can typically make the reservations, and then as a default tenant you create the business groups, tie up the reservations to the business groups. Inside business group you have a business group manager who can manage the end users for that particular business groups, and tenant admin, typical tenant admin will do user management for that particular tenant, branding. So you may have system-wide branding, but a particular tenant wants their own branding. So it's like a public cloud environment. One tenant comes to you and says that I want my own branding. You can do it per tenant level as well to define the approval policies and catalog management. These are the tasks that you can do as a default tenant, tenant admin. Right? So that is a single tenant environment. What if we have a multi-tenant, but the infrastructure configuration is done by the default tenant only? So why would they do that, or where we would do that? Typically in an organization, say the backend infrastructure is managed by the infra team, but you have multiple departments who act as like multiple tenants for you. Say you have HR department or say business tower, a business group. They can be multiple tenants. but all the resources that are managed by the central data center infra team. So there, you would use the system admin environment to create multiple tenants, and then the default tenant, you would log in as a default tenant admin and then configure the infrastructure fabric. You can create IaaS admin password, right? And you will create the endpoints, then fabric groups. You define the fabric admin there. These are the exact steps that you would do. A login first, the deployment. After the deployment, you log in as a system admin, create the default tenants or multiple tenants, then log out, log in with default tenant admin, and then in the system admin rights, there are two different rights that you need to give. One is tenant admin and another one is IaaS admin right. So once you log in with tenant admin and IaaS admin right, you can configure the endpoint, then you configure fabric groups. When you configure the fabric groups, you add a fabric admin, then you need to log in with that fabric admin, the reservations, and with multiple tenants, you define the business groups there, and then tie up everything together. And if you want to have a infra admin at each level, one thing you need to understand, in VRA environment, the endpoints are pretty much similar to for all of them. So the infra admin or the IaaS admin can see the entire resources. The fabric admin, the fabric groups that is created, that you create, are the small chunks of the resources. But whoever is the infra admin, they can see that entire environment, right? So this is a typical multi-tenant environment with infra admin rights given to each and every tenant. So these are all rights that you can give to any user in your environment, depending on the rights that you're giving. So any user at tenant C, if you give him IaaS admin rights, you'll be able to see the entire infrastructure. Or if you give him fabric group admin rights, you can see that entire fabric group. That's how it works. So it's the different rights, depending on the rights, you get the access. So as a tenant, typical IaaS administrators will configure the endpoints, fabric administrators slice up the entire resource, blueprint architects will configure the blueprints, catalog administrators can manage the catalog portion, and then there are approval administrators which manages the approvals, and there are approvers who can actually approve the things, the different approval policies, and then you have business group managers who manages the business group users, and then you have support users. Your catalog administrators can manage the catalog items, business group and managers consume the catalog items, the support users or the business users consume the catalog items. Tenant administrator has right for all three of things. They can, as a tenant administrator, he can create a blueprint, you can create catalogs, you can administer catalogs, give an entitlement, create business groups, create business group managers and everything. So as a tenant admin, I would say it's a super admin for this particular tenant. Not system admin from VRA perspective, but is a super admin from a tenant perspective. Yes. So that was the theory portion, slide portion, backend of what VRA, what different components comprises of, what are the different roles and responsibilities that you have in VRA. So just to summarize, once you deploy a VRA environment, the first thing that you need to do is log into the VRA console as system admin. You can create different multiple tenants there. You can configure system-wide branding. You can configure email servers. Once you do that, create one user who will have tenant admin rights and infra admin rights, and then log out, log into the default tenant with the rights. Next thing you do is create endpoints, configure the endpoints so that you can get the resources. Once the resources are visible in VRA, you go ahead and consume the resources, create fabric groups. Fabric groups, you define a fabric group manager or administrator, log in at that user, create reservation, right? And then as a tenant admin, you create business group as well. And while creating the reservations, you tie up the reservations to the business groups. And then you configure the blueprints and give the entitlements, and you once you publish to the catalog, you get the things in catalog. So you can, end users can go ahead and as per the defined entitlements, they can go ahead and consume the catalog items. That is how the entire workflow for vRealize works. Right? So now let's go ahead and see a little bit of demo of that running environment. So this is my lab environment. It's the vRealize appliance, typically vRealize.lab.local. I can log into console. I can go to appliance management, and I can go to orchestrator configuration. Since the orchestrator is inherent or inbuilt to it, I can go ahead and configure the orchestrator as well. So let's go to the management console and see the different things. Brings you to 5480. This is the vCafe cafe appliance root ID password. So the typical settings that you can see, you can configure the HSO setting, licensing, database, messaging, that RabbitMQ messaging service you can see from here, and then the different logs. If you want to do migration, that is one important aspect. If you want to migrate from 6.2 environment, you can do a parallel migration of that environment through this tool. Inbuilt tool is here. You can use this tool to do a migration of older environment, data from older environment to the existing environment. One important aspect which always helps me is the services that is running. So note the number of services that is running. Typically there are 35 services. The status needs to be registered for all of them, and it needs to be running condition. So if any one of them is not registered, the unregistered state or some other state, that means you have some environment or some problem in your environment. You need to check care of check that or take care of that. Right? System is like typical. It would let you reboot, and admin would let you change the password and stuff, whether each server is enabled or not. That is where you manage the cafe appliance itself. Not a vRealize environment, but the cafe appliance itself. I want to just go through it. And then next, console. vRealize console. So this is the system administrator page. Login. I am not logged into any tenant. I have logged into default system admin environment. So here I can, as you can see, that I can create multiple tenants. I can simply click on add and then create a new tenant, local user defined, and then the administrators are there. And notice that here you would define the administrators, who are the tenant administrator and IaaS administrator. You need to define one IaaS administrator here, otherwise you will not be able to add your endpoint. But typically, what we would do, we go to default tenant, which is vSphere.local, and we create an administrator here, and we don't give IaaS administrator right to any other user anywhere else. So that the authority will be always with the backend team. That's what you can do. As I said, that you can configure the branding from here, what's the header logo or the company name or anything. Email servers, you can configure it only from here. The inbound server and the outbound mail server. Event logs you can check. These are the typical event logs from the cafe appliance. Right? What are the events that are happening there? Once this is done, now I would log in as one tenant. So the URL is the appliance/vcac/org and then tenant name. So since my environment is already registered with another external domain, I have both the options. I can use any one of them to authenticate and login. So I will just use this, and So this is your home page. You can give a custom message here. Message board will show that your recent request will be shown here. If you publish something as news and noteworthy,
it's not loaded yet.
okay, it's not loaded. Okay. It will be if you make something as new and noteworthy, it will be coming under this portlet. These are all called portlets. If you have any open request, you can configure this portlet. You can actually close this portlet or manage this portlet from here, change layout or add portlet from this option. But you can define for the end users as well. Next tab is catalog, where all the catalog items are shown. You can have multiple services defined. So I have typically defined 3 different services: IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS service, and under that other services, right? And all services will show all the things. But when I start, see, it's the first time that I have configured. So I will typically go to the infrastructure tab and configure the endpoints. Since I have infrastructure admin right, I will go to infrastructure and then configure the endpoint. I will need to define the endpoint that I want to configure here. One very important aspect is the name of this endpoint. This endpoint name should be exactly similar, exactly identical to what you have configured into proxy agent. When you define or deploy a proxy agent, you give there an endpoint name. So the endpoint name that you give here, it needs to be identical to that, otherwise it will not communicate, right? So this is where I will define the endpoint. Once the endpoints are defined, I can go ahead and create a fabric group. Like for example, in my case, I have created a test fabric group to show me the entire resources for that endpoint. Like for this vCenter server, I have 2 different clusters. One is NSX cluster and lab cluster. I can define which cluster I want to use and define a fabric administrator. Since I have given this IaaS admin as a fabric administrator right, I can see the portions. The first thing that I need to do once I deploy and configure the default tenants there, I need to come here under infrastructure tab, I need to configure the endpoints and then fabric groups. Then typically I would go ahead and go to administration tab. I would configure users, say directory management, you can configure a directory here. You would integrate with external directory, like for my example, I have integrated with this external AD. So you will configure it with the AD and then probably you can give the rights. Or it's not a mandatory task, you can or you cannot. But under users and groups, you have this business groups definition option. Here you would go ahead and create any business group. So once you add an endpoint, come back here and then configure a fabric group and then come back here and create a business group. Right? But unless until you create a business group, you cannot configure a reservation from a fabric admin. So then you go back to infrastructure portion and then configure a reservation here. So define a network profile. First, you create a network profile. You want to define any reservation policies, you need to define the reservation policy. Then go ahead and configure a reservation. Like, see, for example, I have created this reservation and give it a name, reservation policy, and the priority. The resources that you would use, it would show me all the resources, that memory and the storage that is available, and if there is any pool that you have configured at the vCenter server, it will show you the pools as well, all the pools that is available under that vCenter servers. So it will show me network, you will map the network adapters with the profile. So network profile, whatever network profile that you have configured, you will actually be able to map those pools with the port groups that you have in your vCenter servers or the vCenter environment. And since I have integrated NSX in my environment, I get to define the transport zone, the security groups and distributed logical routers or whatever configuration that I have done at the NSX available. That's the advanced configuration. You can define any custom policies, properties, and set an alert. Like if the storage goes till 80%, it should send you an alert, and who should be the recipient for that alert. You can set a reminder frequency as well, so that you know that, okay, I'm running out of resources. You can set the alerts from this reservation. So once the reservation is set, that means now you have resources mapped to your environment. You can deploy machines and the machines will be deployed. That's the resources portion. But till now, we have not configured any blueprints or anything. End users can't see anything. So the next thing we would do, the next thing that we will do, we will go ahead and design a blueprint, right? Design a blueprint, you can click on new, give it a name, test, archive days, say 10 days, you set that, release days you may or may not set. If you want to utilize the NSX in this blueprint environment, you can configure which transport zone it will be part of, or any reservation policies for edge and routed gateway. I have defined this. And then this is the designer. Right? On the left-hand side, you have the categories and the different types. Like for example, the first thing that is selected is machine types. Under that, you can have all these different types of machines. So in my environment, I know that there is only vSphere that is supporting in my environment, so I can only use vSphere as a machine. I do not have Azure machine. I can create a blueprint here, but I don't have any resources supporting that blueprint. So if I try and publish it, it would fail actually. So I can simply click and drag a virtual machine here. Now when I click and drag a virtual machine, so I need to give a minimum and maximum number of instances that can go for this blueprint. So I can get only one machine, or I can have multiple machines here. Just change the number of minimum and maximum, and you can deploy that. Next thing is, and the major important thing is build information. So blueprint type, you can configure desktop or server. The action, whether it would create a fresh machine, it would create. It would be cloned from an existing environment, or it would do a linked clone. So if you want to do a cloning, you need to have a predefined template in vCenter server. If you want to do a linked clone, you need to have a snapshot created on a machine on a vCenter server. So if I select clone, and then you need to select clone from. Right? So right now I don't have any template there. That's why it's not showing me clone from. But if I select linked clone, because I created multiple snapshots there, I have this template. And I can use current snapshot. So that particular template had multiple snapshots. I can select which snapshot I want to use, whether use current snapshot or here a blueprint snapshot, I can create. And I can add customization specifications here as well. Next thing that I need to do is resources. I need to define the resources. Say how many CPUs will be there. So minimum, it should start with one CPU, it can go up to 4 CPUs. So you deploy, the end user deploys a virtual machine with this. Later on, they can add another CPU there. The memory limit, and then similar storage. You will define the storage. Right? You can define the further custom properties for the storage. If you want to tie to storage reservation policy or drive later or mount path, you can define all that stuff, and you can allow user to see and make changes to the reservation policies as well. You can select from here. The network portion right now, I have not added any network component in the designer blueprint. This area, that's the reason it's not showing me any networking component option. Okay, now on the left hand side, I don't have any software components defined. I have already 4 different blueprints which I can use in this blueprint. That means, it simply means that I can define a blueprint. Say for example, database server, Oracle database server. I have a standalone Oracle database server as a blueprint offering. I can use that blueprint to make further blueprints, complex composite blueprints using that existing blueprint. Network and service security, and then SaaS component containers. So I will go to network and security and typically drag an existing network. The moment I build an existing network, it would ask me network profile. Say I'll choose any profile here, predefined profile that which I had defined under reservation. Remember, under reservations we defined network profile. So I can consider that the network profile is here. And then now if I click on this machine, it would give me an option of adding network. So by default, it will be connected to this. I can define the assignment type, whether DHCP or static IP. If I select static IP, it would pick it up from the pool of the networking profile that I have configured earlier. And address, you can give a manual address, or it should auto-generate. You can auto-generate an address as well. And the maximum number of network adapters you want to allow for this particular virtual machine. Do not mention anything, it's unlimited, but if you mention something, say maximum 2 number of network adapters you want, so you can define it here. You can use, see, the one thing is on the left hand side, you can see that on-demand security group, NAT, routed, load balancer, these are all available because I have an NSX manager integrated into this environment. So if I select, say, on-demand security group, I can define the security policies, say block SSH policy, and then go to this machine. It's already available here. I can select that yes, I want this security group. So the moment this machine would be deployed, it would be on-demand security group will be defined in my NSX manager and it will be tagged with that. And then endpoint, if I have any custom properties, I want this particular virtual machine to be part of any property group, I can define it here. So that's how I will create one blueprint. The moment I create a blueprint, it comes here, and the next thing that I need to do is publish. Until I publish a blueprint, it's not visible anywhere. The moment I click on publish, it comes into the catalog. Then I go back to administration and then catalog management. So the moment I press publish from there blueprint, it comes to the catalog items left. So it is visible here. So then I select it and then I further configure that particular catalog item to attach to a service, or you predefine a service first, because when the first time you are configuring, you don't have any services defined. So you need to define a service here. You need just start test service, give it an icon, give it an icon, and give an owner who is the owner of that particular service, support him, and then configure a service element here. For example, I have this IaaS service defined here. I will go back, and for any catalog item, I need to attach that item to any service that I have defined. Otherwise, it will not be visible in catalog. Because in catalog, you see, if I go back here, you can see that every component, every catalog item is termed under any service that I defined. So it comes here. So I need to go back there and attach it to a service. Once I attach the catalog item to a service, then I need to define the actions that I can do, or probably not right now, but under entitlement I will be able to do that. So I will define an entitlement. So entitlement is like I am entitling users to see and use that service. So I will go ahead and define a new entitlement. So for example, I click on new and then give it a name, whether the status is activate or deactivated, which particular business group will be able to see that and use that entitlement. I will define here users and groups. Also, I will define who all are the users and groups who can use that particular entitlement. And till the time it loads, I will just explain what we will do in entitlement. So I will go ahead and give the entitlement to create an entitlement for the business group users and different components, catalog items I will entitle there. Is it visible? Just check here. So I was explaining that entitlements. So I will go ahead and configure entitlement, give it a name, define a user or group, or I can simply one shot I can select all users and groups and they can see it. I get to a particular business group and then go to items and approval. What are the different services that this particular entitlement pertains to? What are the entitled items and the item actions that you can do on this particular catalog item? Once I define the entitlements, if I have given the entitlement, it will come here. And then end users can go ahead and use this entitlement to utilize the request for the particular component. For example, if I want to request under test machine, I can go ahead and simply click submit. Request a machine, it will come to request and it will be deployed. So this is the entire workflow in short for vRealize automation. There are other things like when you go to design portion, you have option for configuring IaaS services. I was discussing about IaaS services. Here, let's say I want to build a IaaS blueprint. I have this vRealize orchestrator at the back end. I have multiple options or multiple workflows, say out of the box workflows or custom made workflows. Like for example, this particular task was to add user to BG business group entitlements. Though I have just completed the workflows that you would need to go through to give an entitlement to an user. So one of my customers requested that they wanted one workflow where the users would simply go ahead and use them and add them to a particular entitlement. So if I would first go ahead and build a custom workflow in vRealize orchestrator that I need to do. So I had built custom scripts and custom workflows. If it's already available, that is fine. Otherwise, I will have to build custom workflows. And then I can create new blueprint which will show me all the workflows that are available under vRealize orchestrator. Right? So for example, in my case, I had to build these custom workflows. I can select a custom workflow pertaining all the parameters pertaining to that workflow would be visible here. I would go ahead and say give it a name and versioning, and this is a typical form that is being shown to me. So my workflow requires 3 different inputs. One is business group name, then the username that needs to be added, list of entitlement names. So I want to show end users a list of the business groups available in the environment, list of entitlements available to that particular business group, and in that particular environment, and user will give a user name. We will, once it submits that request, that user will be added to the business groups. So that's what this form is all about. So I can go ahead and click finish, and the similar way, the way we have just published a blueprint, we can do that similar way. We can publish a catalog item or a JAS service as well. So if I want to just see that the workflow run, I can do this. Say for example, if I go into entitlements, I can see that test 1 has user 1 and user 2. Let me remove user 1 and user 3 from here. So the test 1 entitlement does not have user 1 and user 2 there, right? It's only IaaS admin and VCAC admin. And if I go to business groups, let's go to business groups and see who all are the users that is there. Under test, I can see the members, and user 3 is already there. So let me just remove user 3 here. So here we can see that the business group test does not have any users here. User role, it does not have any user role, and the entitlement test 1 does not have any normal user. Test new one has user 1, so I let me remove user 1 from here as well. And test 3 has user 1, let me remove from here as well. So now the user is not there. I go to catalog and say under that, add user to BG and entitled user. I go for this request. It shows me a list of all the business groups there. It's actually querying the vRealize server and shows me a list. I want to add the user, say user 3 @lab.local. This particular user, I want to add it to test business group, and I want to entitle this user for test 1 and test 2 these two entitlements. I submit the request. I go to request, I can see that add user to BG and entitlements. If I go back to here, add user to BG and entitlements, I'll be able to see that workflow run. Approved. And it's successful, right? So that means if I go back to administration under entitlements, user 3 should be added to, user 3 has been added to test 1 and test new 1, and this particular user should be added to the business group as well. Business group test. If I go to members, I can see that user has been added to this business group. So this is the custom workflow that we have built using vRealize Orchestrator. It is actually going ahead and calling out the vRealize Orchestrator workflow, running that, and creating some tasks here in VRE which is not available out of the box. And the beauty of VRE is this extensibility. I have an orchestrator running in the back end. That means I can build pretty much anything that I want. That is where the power of SaaS, anything as a service is. You want to build a service, you go ahead and build a service in vRealize Orchestrator, export it here, and it should be available as a service, and you can run it as a catalog item. That is what vRealize Orchestrator is all about. So I think I'm complete. I have completed the entire session. If you have any questions, you can question. You can further send your questions to us. And
great. So thanks, Sajal. Guys, if you have any questions, you can unmute your line by pressing *6 and ask your question verbally. I don't see any questions in the chat window. There was one. I think Prasanna has already answered that. So *6 you can press and unmute your line and ask your question if you have.
There is a under directory management there is a thing is safeguard. Hello.
CRUD, that is the database operations. Create, you update, delete those operations.
Hello.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to ask about the safeguard option in the directory management during the sync setting. So what should be the best practice? Means generally by default it is a 5%. Okay. So what should be the best value of change percent?
It depends on your environment and the kind of configurations that you have done. So typically 5% to 10%, because if it's a lot, if the number is pretty big, it can actually hang your entire environment. So I would say depending on your environment, the backend and the environment that you have set up, it varies from environment to environment. But typically 5%, 5 to 10% is I would say.
Okay, thanks.
So there's a question which has been sent by Apurv to me. He really wants to confirm if Sajal, you're the guy who's actually written that Mastering Power CLI.
Yeah, I have written that Mastering Power CLI book.
Yeah.
And
yeah. So you've got some fan following here.
Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot. And another thing that I wanted to mention here that I keep writing at http://vtechguru.com. You can go ahead, go to this website, and I keep writing about VRO, VRA. I would show it here, like APIs and all that stuff. If you find it useful, you can actually go ahead and read that. So this is what this blog post is all about. If you go ahead and check it sometime. So how to integrate, like I had written a detailed post about how to integrate NSX with vRealize automation. That would help you if you want to do that integration. Or if you want to build that ZAP service using VRO and VRA, you can go ahead and check that. So I would recommend you go ahead and read this blog post sometime.
Great. So there was Sajal presenting the vRealize automation and along with Prasanna Shetty. So I don't see any more questions. I'll just make one final request, final call for questions. If anybody has a question, then you can press *6 to unmute. We still have 4 more minutes left for the session. So anybody who's got a question, press *6 to unmute. If we don't hear anything in the next couple of minutes, then we'll close the session. All right, so looks like people don't have any questions, and I see the chat window is also cleared off by Prasanna. So just want to thank Sajal and Prasanna Shetty for delivering this session for all the customers here, and I want to thank all the customers for joining in for this session. Whoever joined in, we'll also be sending out the session recording, so that if you want to view it later on, you can. And if you have any questions, you can route those questions via your TAMs to the presenters. So thank you again for everyone joining in.
Thank you everyone for your time.